You've repeatedly seen his face, even Richard. If you can't recall his name, Jaeckel was a real mainstay in Hollywood, shining in dirty, grim war movies, beach shows, police dramas, and westerns alongside lifeguards. He personified the ruggedness, dependability, and genuineness things filmmakers were looking for, but not of the heartthrob or leading man. His grounded presence gave each thing vitality and depth. He played Dot for over 6 months, century, and he served as the cornerstone of the TV shows and movies that influenced Americans. The concept of masculinity, however, over time, something changed. Vanished not because of controversy or shame, but from a much deeper anguishing quiet. The story of Jaeckel is one of subtle excellence. He wasn't the kind to intimidate, wearing sunglasses on the red carpet and a superstar image. He was the person clutching a gun while crouching in a foxhole, giving you the impression that he spent from his breakthrough performance in memorable Guadalcanal Diary, The Dirty Dozen's performances, and occasionally a brilliant idea he poured, putting everything into each role. But in spite of praise for his loyalty, and even in Jaeckel never received an Academy Award nomination, achieved at a list standing, and possibly even worse, Hollywood had no intention of raising him there for a long time. He worked non-stop, taking part in more than 150 movies and television shows. About him was committed to the art instead of the fame. He didn't participate in the Hollywood game or eventually aim for short-lived fame. Without him, the industry continued to grow because of a scandal or a decline in popularity, but merely due to the fact that his time had passed. When his last moments came, there were no large-scale parades or broadcast tributes, simply a quiet leave and a gentle farewell for a man who helped create the very what is the essence of a classic American movie. Transpired throughout Richard Jaeckel's final years is not just startling, but profoundly sadly. This is not a story of failure, but rather one of unwavering commitment, treated with ruthless contempt. But that was only the first. What came next would be shocking. Even his most loyal fans. Richard Jaeckel was not raised surrounded by in the glitz of nursing or Hollywood aspirations of fame. Were born in Long in 1926. He moved to Beach, New York, with his family to Los Angeles while he was as a child. It was situated beneath the Hollywood, indication that his fate took an unexpected turn that he didn't intend to. Actually, he entered the film industry, was working as a boy at the age of 20, when Century Fox's life took a distinct course. At the age of barely 17, without any connections or acting experience, he got a part in the Guadalcanal Diary movie, important war movie that came out in 1943. This section launched his career. More than 50 years from the beginning, he made a distinction himself. Jaeckel had an air of genuineness that wasn't arrogant persistence. He never gave overt performances. However, they had an effect on his portrayal. Personalities that seemed to have really fought in combat and could make even small roles unforgettable. Once he expressed an unadulterated passion that struck a profound chord with critics and casting agents. Noticed that Jaeckel had a talent to make others around him better. He wasn't loud or ostentatious, he was just gifted. But beyond that harsh appearance, there was a man who was surprisingly kind and gentle, and his co-workers characterized him as passionately loyal, as discreet, professional, and quiet. He never attempted to eclipse others and never pretended to be better than others on set. He showed up on schedule, did his obligations, and handled everyone from production assistants to directors with courtesy. But his modesty might have made it more difficult. Him in a field that prioritizes the bold and self-aggrandizing, while his peers looked for magazines' renown and profitable transactions. Jaeckel was only happy to pretend that he loved the craft for something. It wasn't a path to fame, but a talent to develop, and this every performance was filled with enthusiasm. Depicting a tough soldier or a woman, there was always a deeper local law in his character's intricacy. Nevertheless, in spite of a substantial corpus of research and the respect of his peers, the spotlight kept slipping away from him. As if Hollywood couldn't quite decide how to deal with a man who was a tough, strong guy with sensitivity spirit. Over the years, Jaeckel demonstrated that he was more than he was a trustworthy supporting actor. Soon, a combatant in real life. And on television, he would face some of his most difficulties as the 1960s drew near. Richard Jaeckel was well established, rather not as a box office celebrity, but as a renowned character actor who brought complexity to each persona. He adopted the kind of entertainer producers trusted to deliver, no matter how his main challenge was to the role. In 1967, a breakthrough was made with The Dirty Dozen is an intense and a memorable action movie about World War II. It included a few of Hollywood's largest stars in this distinguished when the cast. Jaeckel wasn't he was the most showy and credible. That genuineness was consistently acknowledged, but the blasts weren't the only thing. And shooting that demonstrated Jaeckel's talents in 1971, he gave a strong, emotionally packed performance in the movie Sometimes a Great Notion. A harsh and emotionally weak loggers, his efforts won him an Academy Award, Best Supporting Actor nomination, signifying a high point in critical praise moment that ought to have warned of the beginning of a new phase. However, even within the phone did not start the Oscar nomination. Regularly buzzing with offers, there were no glitzy or profitable contracts that were awaiting him, but instead he returned to the routine and accepted the types of hard, quiet jobs he was familiar with. It acted as a harsh reminder of the way performers were treated in Hollywood. Such as Jaeckel was grateful for their tenacity but rarely recognized. In spite of all of his talent and hard work on the field, never quite understood how to give him a prize. As the more recent dazzling talents dominated the screens, his subtle strength began to be overlooked in the background. This required and negatively impacted him. Jaeckel was not one to voice grievances. He was employed at heart, but his loved ones pointed out irritated moments. He saw others who were less skilled, but greater charm to become a star. He noted that the sector was moving away from his character-driven stories admired for effects-driven blockbusters. Throughout it all, he kept demonstrating get up and complete the task, no matter how remote or insignificant the job had grown. The spotlight made him feel the battle off-screen was equally intense. The fights he fought in the movie were a competition for respect, significance, and a feeling of purpose. Even if he hardly ever showed the marks, those difficulties left scars that would become more intense as he entered the subsequent stage of his career. This stage was distinguished by tenacity but also silent grief due to the fact that Richard Jaeckel never given up. But Hollywood was I'm starting to forget Richard Jaeckel was never one to rest for a moment. Others took a break between tasks or left the entire industry. Jaeckel maintained moving forward from the 1940s to the he rarely permitted more than a handful throughout the 1990s. Months without making an appearance on the set, his filmography continued to grow every year, eventually showcasing more than 150 films, including most actors' television credits. Even it would be a dream for half that much to Jaeckel. It was just his route selected. Despite changes in the film business in the 1980s and early 1990s, he made the adaptation. He established himself as a familiar face on television, participating on shows such as Starman and Spencer from Baywatch are available for hiring. Was not in the lead, but he stood a lot. Recognized as each episode's greatest feature, he displayed in crowds may not have acknowledged his name, but they had faith in his presence. When the appearance of Richard Jaeckel on screen, audience members expected something sincere, but underlying his ceaseless efforts ethic was a man with limited choices. Hollywood's pursuit of younger, trendy talent, the phone started to ring less frequently. His roles often became smaller, quick visitor with background characters looks, or aggressive guys with little. There were no more Oscar-worthy dialogue segments still approaching him. He went up to each role with an equivalent degree of dedication and ferocity. He had consistently displayed. A discernible shift occurred in the early 1990s. His eyes became intense. He began missing calls as he faded, losing weight and forgetting scripts. At first, the indications were faint, but people around him started to worry. By 1994, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. In addition to that, the biggest irony he could think of was diagnosis no longer stay employed by a man whose name had consistently been entwined with his craft, withdrawing from acting as though it were a slow breakdown. There was no magazine or farewell tour, final tearful interviews, or covers. His exit from the business was as silent for a minute as his arrival had been. He was a familiar figure on the he then disappeared, which signaled the start of the actual conflict. If he had been ignored by Hollywood throughout his prime, the subsequent events would be even more inexcusable. The corpse of Richard Jaeckel by the mid-1990s was not working for him, yet his spirit persisted robust following a lifetime of difficult schedules, many days of filming, and outstanding performances. In his last conflict would be the most tragic and incredibly intimate. In 1996, Jaeckel was identified as having terminal cancer. The condition spread rapidly after the age of 70. depleting his power and vitality. He had been acting for a long time. Career that had sustained him for more than 50 years came to a sudden halt. Similar to that, the sector that he seemed to forget what he had dedicated his life to. That he was ever. But the true surprise came when the financial situation became apparent. In spite of a long career with hundreds of credits, Richard Jaeckel did not have the funds to steadiness that everyone thought he would possess. His medical bills were mounting quickly, and his family has already emotionally strained and confronted with an intolerable contest. The man who had disclosed the screen beside icons like John Wayne as well as Clint Eastwood was now being moved to a movie theater and televised funhouse for industries in need. There were no fundraisers for veterans. The red carpet, no remarks spoken in public by major studios, are silent. The same quiet that had surrounded him as his name faded and his roles diminished. It was remembered by the people as a bitter reminder that loyalty does not guarantee an enduring legacy, and working-class actors, regardless of how prolific, are frequently overlooked when the spotlight fades. But Jaeckel's tale did not come to an end in total darkness. When fans and former co-workers were made aware of his situation, stunned a lot of people. A grassroots surge of assistance started. To donations did not amount to millions, but sufficient to influence actors he had worked with years before. Friends contacted out and made a silent contribution. People who had taken pleasure in seeing him in war movies and westerns sent letters of support. Even though it wasn't the big Hollywood, came to the judgment that he deserved it. Something real, and it was a reminder that although the sector may have rejected those who haven't during this tragedy, Jaeckel stayed modest and never complained. He never publicly reacted angrily to the system that had let him down. If he thought, he never showed rage. Instead, he focused on how long it had been since he had left those who supported him and that he had previously contributed to the world. But this final chapter nonetheless raised the unsettling query of how could a man who made such a significant contribution to Hollywood ultimately has very little in return. Regretfully, the quietest moment was still Richard Jaeckel spent his last days before days spent in a modest space at the motion home of the Picture and Television Fund in California's Woodland Hills. Is a stunning crimson carpets in contrast to the film sets and the sound stages that had defined his life. He gradually deteriorated from a sector that previously relied on his face to share its most captivating tales. No goodbye documentaries were available. There will be in memoriam specials for Prime for many. At the time his absence was on June 14th, it was almost too quiet. 1997, Richard Jaeckel died when cancer was the cause of 70, and he struggled with bravely and without protest. His passing hardly caused a stir in a few trades in the entertainment sector. Publications noticed a few of specials on television provided a brief recognition, but the media is hungry to honor larger, more ostentatious names. Couldn't speak much for a man who had assumed over 150 roles, many of which were recognizable. The quiet was overpowering. However, those who were familiar with him remember to say goodbye in a different way. Barry and Richard J.R.B., his sons, remembered a parent who never permitted resentment to devour him. In spite of his sickness, he stayed calm and grounded, just as he did not fear the situation, as he had always been. In the end, he embraced it through his profession. Might have forgotten about him and his family, always kept him in mind, and the admirers who continue to rediscover his contributions via replays at night and vintage movie channels. Weren't only his final decades were as silent as there weren't any scandals to report, though. Crazy breakdowns in Hollywood don't. Dramatic interviews meant to attract focus, just consistent, hard labor, the kind of labor that maintained the film industry operating in the manner that frequently goes unacknowledged but always important. Although he has acted in the past, alongside went on to receive multiple honors, obtain contracts for millions of dollars, and became renowned, Jaeckel departed this existence without a magnificent home, without riches, and without the recognition he had been the one who earned it. Uncelebrated spine of many productions that regularly deliver in the end, without making any demands. It was that silent elegance that greatly characterized him, greater than any headline could possibly. Life ended, but not in shame or scandal, but in something that might even it's harder to accept, forgetting for someone who had given their all to his art. That anonymity felt more nasty, but the story doesn't stop there. What his life represented here, and what it revealed about Hollywood's underappreciated heroes, are still something we struggle with when individuals consider in the heyday of American cinema. They frequently focus on the headline stars, Movers, the titans of the box office, and those with names engraved on them forever. Sidewalks and awards. Hollywood, in fact, wouldn't have endured in the absence of its Richards. Richard Jaeckel never served as the spokesperson for the advertising, but it was he who created. He noted that the advertising was meaningful. Action scenes. Depth introduced to adding a human touch to military movies and adding a maintaining authenticity in stories that could have felt empty otherwise. Wasn't just a supporting performer. He was the spirit of the show, and still, in spite of everything that remained of him, not due to a lack of ability, but as he never sought celebrity in the same way, he didn't participate in what others did. He didn't hire Hollywood politicians, publicists to write narratives or produce personal drama-filled headlines. Instead, he let his work do the talking, unfortunately on its own in a sector that often overlooks those who are not artists. Focus on themselves. His silence. Dignity turned into a conflicting sword. His story raises a difficult wonder why certain performers turn into preserved while others disappear within obscurity. Richard Jaeckel devoted 50 years to devoting his life to performing. He produced achievements for which he received an Academy. He shared the screen with his award nominee. Alongside renowned people, he acquired the respect from his fellow filmmakers and spectators, but in the end, his name was not present at a lot of the tributes there. There were no noteworthy honors given to his career of achievements without releases of his best-known movies, just a slow and silent disappearance away from the spotlight. But for those who saw his creation, for the admirers who remember the genuineness and intensity of his stare in his acting and the strength he brought Richard Jaeckel to each scene. More importantly, it stays unforgettable. He reminds people that real Hollywood excellence doesn't always focus on the box office or headlines. Sometimes it centers on numbers, constancy, commitment, and honesty. Jaeckel might have died without riches, honors, or broad acknowledgement, but he left something behind far more durable, a body of work that is still relevant and leaves a legacy that, while being frequently disregarded, is still embedded in the framework of American movie. Thus, the next time you're watching a station and possibly see him wearing a uniform, being at peril while riding a horse, or that silent intensity, pause for a moment. Stop, because the man you're talking about might not be aware was one of the. Richard Jaeckel is the greatest person to ever do it. Didn't need to shine in the spotlight, only need a camera, and he created each number of shots.